Welcome along to this series of vodcasts on probably one of the most widely applicable aspects of law that we're going to do in the course. Probably this and negligence are pretty close. Probably contracts even bigger than negligence. Why? Because just about everything we do in business involves a contract. So understanding the core principles of contract is really important. We're going to do the topic over 2 weeks. Even though we've got 2 weeks, it's not a lot of time at all. Like if we were doing a law subject, it'd probably take a full year to do contract properly. So what are we going to concentrate on? Well, we're going to concentrate on making sure we know the difference between what a contract is and what a contract isn't. We're also going to concentrate on understanding how we know that we've actually formed a contract, right? How do we know that we've got a contract versus something else, versus say a promise or something like that? So how do we know that we've actually got a contract? We want to think about, well, okay, well, it looks like we got a contract. Are there times when it might not be enforceable, even though it looks like we've got a contract? And yeah, there are. So we'll cover a couple of those. One of the ones that we'll probably come across most in business, not all of them, but a couple of the ones that are really important. Then we've got to work out like what's in the contract, what's the terms of the contract, so that I know what I'm going to get and what I've got to do. And then finally, we'll look at remedies. What happens if you don't fulfill your side, or if the other side doesn't fulfill their side? So we're going to cover off the basics. You know, what is a contract? How do I know I've got it? Will I always have a contract even though I've got those essential elements? What's in the contract? What happens if I don't fulfill my part of the bargain? And so in this first little section, we're going to concentrate on what is a contract and how do I know I've got one. So the words that get used here around how do I know I've got a legally enforceable contract, let's use the words simple, apparent contract, okay? So I really want to make use of this word apparent, because what that really means that it kind of looks like we've got a contract. It still might be unenforceable, and we've got to look at some of next week's content to make that point. But we do have a contract, a simple contract. It looks like we've got a simple contract in place. So to do that, we're going to look at those essential elements of a contract. We're going to understand what we mean by agreement, what we mean by an intention to create legal relations, and also what we mean by consideration. These are the 3 essential elements that we need to have a contract. We need all of them, right? It's an and test. So we need agreement and intention and consideration. If one is lacking, we won't have a contract. So business is all about making deals. It's all about contracts that we have in place. Contracts of employment, for instance. Contracts for services. If you get your car washed, that's a contract. A contract if you sell, say, a house, contract for sale. Contract if you buy goods. Contract if you take out a loan. Contract if you have a lease for your house, or even if you, say, lease goods, lease a computer, lease a car. All of these are contracts. Therefore, contracts underpin business. Why? Because business knows that we're going to have a legally enforceable agreement. Central to having a viable economic system is that people have to keep their promises, that it becomes an enforceable agreement rather than just a matter of honor. Okay, so one of the big things about contract is that there can be misconceptions. Some people think that contracts are only written, signed documents, but that's not true. In fact, perhaps most contracts in business aren't written down at all or signed. They can be verbal or implied by the conduct of the parties. Now, what does that actually mean? Take a rather simple situation. Say you regularly order coffee from the same coffee shop. So every day you go in, you look at the barista, you don't say anything. The barista nods at you, they make the coffee that you normally order, the coffee gets put up, you take the coffee, you give over the money and you walk away. So in that whole situation, no one's even said a word. It's just all been conduct. It's all been behavior based, but there is a contract, right? So for instance, if the milk was off, right, and you got sick because of it, etc., there'd be a breach of contract. Now, there's probably also a negligence suit, but there'd be a breach of contract that the goods are of merchantable quality, for instance. So what we can see here is that we don't need anything to be signed written. We don't even need to speak. We can look at the conduct of the parties sometimes to show that we've got a contract. That example of the coffee is also an example of a contract that is formed and performed at the same time. What does that mean? Okay, so here we've got the kind of coffee shop bench or bar, and we've got the person behind it, and then you walk up, yeah? So what they're doing is they're putting the coffee up, they're performing the contract. That's the behavior, that's their part, you're offering to buy and they're accepting it, or they're offering to sell and you accept when you take it. But notice that contract is being performed. They're delivering the coffee, you're handing over your hard-earned cash at the same time, okay? So the contract is formed and performed at the same time. Lots of other contracts, though, don't involve people performing. So you don't have to pay, or you don't have to deliver what you've said you'll deliver when you make the contract. In fact, sometimes one person performs, okay, and the other person makes a promise. So they could give you that coffee and you could promise to pay tomorrow. That's still a contract. Or they could promise to make you a coffee tomorrow if you promise to pay tomorrow. That's still a contract where both of the parties have made a promise. So it's really important to recognize a promise for a promise can be a contract, okay? It doesn't have to be a performance element on one or both sides. Now, this could make you think that absolutely everything is a contract, but again, that's not true either. In fact, there's lots of things that aren't contracts. So think about it. If you go down to the pub, have 10 beers, and then offer to sell your phone at a ridiculous price to your friend who is admiring it, are you contractually bound? Will it be legally enforceable in a court that you must sell that phone? Or take, for instance, someone who just makes a promise to do, say, a sponsorship deal. They're just going to give money to a worthy cause. Maybe it's, what have we got here? Sponsoring a soccer club, etc. Is that really a contract? Or even if something like an ad a contract, right? So if the local shop advertises something and the price is wrong in the ad, and then you race down there and get really mad when they don't have it and won't sell it to you at that price. Right? Is there a contract there or not? There's lots of behaviours in business that actually aren't contracts. So what we need is a way to differentiate these behaviours, these relationships and circumstances that are contracts from those that aren't. And we've already been over this, right? But the key to it are these three elements. A contract requires agreement, intent, and consideration, with some rare exceptions to consideration. Okay, but we need agreement, intent, and consideration. If we have those three, we will have a contract. It's really important to think about what we're dealing with here conceptually. We're talking about a meeting of minds around a bargain or a deal. Okay, a meeting of minds around a bargain or deal where people intended that it would be enforceable. They're the three elements. Now, I did mention before that just because you have a simple, apparent contract, okay, doesn't mean that you actually have an enforceable contract. And what we can see here are three conditions where you may have what looks like a contract, but it's not enforceable. Why? Because there's something going on that means it's not really a contract. What are the three things that we have here? Well, the first thing is, imagine we've got a 10-year-old, right, who agrees to buy something, and they really intend to go through with the deal, and they'd be happy to go to court, and that they do pay for it. Okay, well, obviously we have agreement, intent, consideration, but a 10-year-old doesn't have the capacity to enter a contract. They don't really understand what they're doing. Can they really intend to create legal relations? Particularly if it's a complex thing, right? So we have to look at, do both of the parties who are agreeing, do they have the capacity to enter a contract? We're not going to deal with that in this course because it's quite a technical area, although it is really interesting in the internet age. You know, if someone clicks on something over the internet, how do you know that they have capacity to contract? So if something goes wrong in that contract, what can you do about it? Okay, so it is a real world problem, but we're not going to deal with it because it's a quite technical area. We will look at a little bit of consent. So did people really agree? Or were they in some way tricked or forced? So we'll talk about that next week. Finally, you won't have a contract if the objects of the contract are illegal. What does that mean? Okay, just say a drug deal. If you go down and cop a couple of foils, it doesn't matter that you agreed, right, that you wanted 2 foils for, I don't know what they go for, $60 these days. It doesn't matter that you agreed. It doesn't matter that you didn't mind being sued for it, that you wanted the drugs for the money. And it doesn't matter. You exchange consideration. You got drugs, they got money, right? Drugs are illegal. The court won't uphold it. It's not a contract, okay? So there are certain circumstances where even though you do have agreement, intent, and consideration, you won't have a contract. That's why in a real contract situation, after you've worked out if you've got agreement, intent, consideration, you still have to ask, okay, did the parties have capacity? Was there consent? Are the objects legal? Okay, so that gives us a sense of what a contract is. The next thing we've got to look is the first of those elements. We've got to start looking at what constitutes agreement.